Hey guys, and welcome back to Knucklehead TV. On the final day of 2020, this awful year, I'd like to look back at some of the good things that happened, in particular for Star Wars, as it was actually quite a good year for Star Wars, arguably the best since 2005. So I'd like to run down my top 10 favorite things that happened regarding Star Wars this year. Whether that's actual pieces of content, returns of actors or characters, whether that is announcements of sorts, or even things outside of actual pieces of content. I'm seeing a lot of people talk about what their favorite Star Wars moments from 2020 were, and I'm seeing a lot of the same answers, and rightfully so, because the best of the best is just jaw-dropping. But there was a lot that happened this year, and not just The Mandalorian or the Clone Wars or certain announcements, but we also got some really interesting books and video games and specials, and so the list just goes on and on and on, and it was really hard for me to narrow it down to 10 to be able to make this video. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Number 10 on my list, I have Bo-Katan being adapted into live action. She is the first animated character that we've seen jump to live action, so that was really cool to see in itself. But the actress who voices her in the Clone Wars and in Rebels, Katie Sackhoff, is actually the one playing her in live action as well. And that actually hasn't been the case for other characters that have made the jump from animation to live action to this point, and we're not sure that it's going to happen again with others, so this could be a unique situation, but nonetheless, it's very, very cool to see. Number 9 on my list, I have the Star Wars Holiday Special. Now, you guys know me, I'm not a big sequel fan by any means, but I thought it was really fun. I enjoyed it. There were lots of jokes and jabs at all parts of Star Wars, and it was very inclusive of all parts of Star Wars. And it was really great because it showed us that not everything has to be taken super seriously, and not everything needs to be a part of this official canon storyline. And I hope that they do more things like this going forwards, because it's nice to be able to just flip on some Star Wars and enjoy and not have to worry about the story implications. Number 8, the Bad Batch trailer. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't obsessed with the Bad Batch arc from the Clone Wars, and before this trailer dropped, I really wasn't excited for the show at all. But the trailer 110% sold me on this series. It was so freaking cool. And I do want to say that for people who aren't super psyched about other shows that are coming out, whether that be the Cassian Andor show, because I hear a lot of people complain about that, or the Visions show, wait until the trailer comes out, because I feel like actually getting to see a piece of what some of this is going to be like is what's going to really get people invested, like me with the Bad Batch. The music for that trailer was just so cool. I loved the visuals in it. There's this scene where Palpatine is talking about the rise of the Empire, and it's actually Ian McDermott's voice from Revenge of the Sith, and he's speaking on this giant screen to all of the clones lined up. And I just love the concept of the Bad Batch, this defective group of clones. We've gotten so many clones throughout the Clone Wars, and they're all so very similar physically and mentally, but of course we were shown that they all have their own unique personalities. But because this group is defective, we've got this giant brute of a character, we've got this badass ranger type leader character, we've got this cold and cunning sniper character, and then of course the super intelligent one, and then Echo of course is now with them as well. So it's just very interesting to me how different they are, and because of how different they are, I don't think they're going to fall in line with the Empire at all. It could be because they're defective that their chips malfunction and they don't get the order to execute Order 66, or perhaps they are just too independent and decide, what the heck, the Empire's not cool, let's fight against this. And you have to remember, this is right during Revenge of the Sith and right after, so the rebellion is not formed really at all at this point. And so I think it's really gonna just be like this group of 5 clones taking on the entire Empire, and I just think that is so cool. Number 7 on my list, I have the return of Boba Fett and the Book of Boba Fett, the upcoming spin-off series that will be releasing at the end of 2021. What's so cool about this is Boba Fett is probably the character that was most fantasized about returning and being redeemed by all fans in the Star Wars universe. George Lucas apparently didn't know at the time that people would love Boba Fett so much, so when Return of the Jedi came about, he unfortunately gave the character an unceremonious death, and lots of fans were very disappointed about that, including myself. Though he did retroactively improve the character in the Star Wars prequels by making him a clone from the famous Clone Wars mentioned in A New Hope, and sort of giving us a second chance to see him in action in the form of Jango Fett, that still wasn't really enough, because we didn't feel the character of Boba Fett got enough screen time. There were stories about him returning in the EU and surviving the Sarlacc pit from Return of the Jedi, and they showed us how badass he truly was, but not everybody reads those stories, and books aren't quite the same as seeing it on screen. And while bringing characters back to life in the Star Wars universe is becoming a bit of a joke, which is unfortunate because I really want to see Mace Windu come back after Revenge of the Sith, and this is primarily because of Emperor Palpatine coming back in The Rise of Skywalker, which is ridiculous for so many reasons that I don't need to get into. Bringing Boba Fett back was a great decision, and it seems like they're going to be doing more than enough with him to justify that decision. The main creative mind behind The Mandalorian, Jon Favreau, is known as being a big Boba Fett fan, and after seeing how The Mandalorian Season 2 played out, it only tells me that he is a huge EU fan and has brought in so many elements from those stories, and it's a really cool thing to see. But before Boba Fett officially made his return to Star Wars, I wasn't 100% sold on The Mandalorian as a show, and with how the Star Wars sequels were handled, I was really starting to question a lot of the decision making that was going into Star Wars. And while he's the only choice for the role of Boba Fett, I was somewhat worried that they weren't going to cast Temuera Morrison, who is the actor who played Jango Fett in Attack of the Clones, and all of the clones in that film and Revenge of the Sith. But they did bring him back as the character, and that made me extremely happy, not just as a fan, but also for him, because Attack of the Clones, even though I personally enjoy it, is a highly criticized film, and I'm glad that he gets to play so many roles in Star Wars, not just Jango Fett, but Boba Fett, and likely Commander Cody in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, and possibly Captain Rex in maybe the Ahsoka series or the Obi-Wan series as well. He has the most interesting role of any actor of all time, being a clone that has so many unique personalities. But I'm glad that he's back and he gets redemption for Boba Fett. He didn't originally play Boba Fett. He was brought in for Jango in the prequels, but he did voiceover for Boba when they released the special editions. But I'm so glad that he is in a piece of content that is very, very loved by the entire Star Wars community, and he is redeeming this character as well as himself. He was never really criticized for the prequels as many other things were, but people really get to see him in a new light now, and I just think that's great. He got some great banter with some of the characters, which was awesome. We got some insight to the character of Boba Fett as well as Jango Fett, tracking the story of Boba Fett's armor all the way back to its origin. We also got to see some amazing action sequences, which I really have to give major props to Robert Rodriguez on that, because the episode that he directed is the one where we got to see the bulk of Boba Fett doing Boba Fett things. And the reason I credit him is because originally the episode was supposed to be a lot shorter than it was, especially the fight sequence with Boba Fett. But Robert Rodriguez said, hey, let's extend this episode a little bit, and his mentality was, if we never get to see Boba Fett ever again, that he wanted to justify the character after so many years of hate and disappointment and saying that Boba Fett never did anything. He wanted to show audiences how cool Boba Fett really was, and he absolutely delivered on that. But luckily for us, that wasn't the end of Boba Fett, as we found out during the after-credit scene of the Season 2 finale of The Mandalorian, we are getting a spin-off series at the end of 2021, and I couldn't be more excited for that. So 2020 was a great year for Boba Fett. Number 6 on my list, and keep in mind this is my personal list, is discovering the guys at Kessel Run Transmissions, the YouTubers and podcasters Noah Outlaw and Corey Van Dyke. Now, before I found out about their channel, there were literally only 2 Star Wars channels that I watched at all. It's not something that I do often, because I personally find a lot of people who make Star Wars content are very disingenuous. But these 2 guys have very separate opinions from one another, and I personally don't agree a whole lot with Noah's opinions, but they are just such cool dudes, and I love watching them and listening to what they have to talk about. They interact with a lot of other Star Wars podcasters and YouTubers, and they also drop scoops, and I've been trying to find credible sources for Star Wars scoops for quite some time, and there aren't a lot. But their track record is very good, and they tell it like it is. You know, they tell us we've been wrong about things, it's possible this could change, and things like that. So as a source for Star Wars scoops, as just another channel that I get to watch and have fun with and hear different opinions, I am so glad that I found their channel and started watching them. I don't know how long they've been doing this, but 2020 is the year that I started watching their channel, so this is a great Star Wars 2020 moment for me personally. And you know how I said there were only 2 other channels that I watched before I started watching Kessel Run Transmissions? Well, that kind of comes in at number 5 here, because they came together and collaborated and are doing a weekly podcast now. That's right, Star Wars Theory and The Den of Nerds were the 2 other channels that I watched. And it's so weird to me that, like, literally, they were the only 2 that I watched. They weren't like the main 2 and there were a couple others or one here or there. I only watched Star Wars Theory and The Den of Nerds. So when they came together and started doing a weekly podcast, it was so weird to me, but so cool at the same time, and I knew that they would have great chemistry and have some really interesting things to talk about, and they have some differing opinions, but they're really cool dudes, and I'm glad that they came together and started doing this, because now I have something every week that I can look forward to regarding Star Wars. Number 4 on my list, the live-action debut of Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka is unquestionably the biggest animated character in Star Wars history. She is a fan-favorite character, literally beloved on the same level as Anakin/Vader, Obi-Wan, and Luke. But a lot of people wouldn't know this because a lot of people just don't watch the animated series, which is really unfortunate because the Clone Wars and Rebels are absolutely fantastic. For whatever reason, cartoons just seem to have this weird stigma around them, and people refuse to watch them almost as if they're above watching cartoons. But now that The Mandalorian has come out and it's the first live-action Star Wars show, and for a lot of people, this is the first good Star Wars content we've gotten since the original trilogy. Now, I am a huge fan of the Clone Wars and of Revenge of the Sith, so I've been pretty content with a lot of the stuff we've gotten since then. But for a lot of people, this is taking it back to the old Return of the Jedi days. So it's invested a lot of people, and when you introduce characters like Ahsoka Tano in this show, and also introduce things like the Darksaber and the story of Mandalore and the Mandalorians, that gets a lot of people to go back and watch the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels to get some of that backstory. But for all of us who watched the Clone Wars and Rebels, seeing Ahsoka go from being the biggest animated character in Star Wars to finally getting a live-action version of her was just incredible. I mean, it truly is like if Luke's entire story was told in the animated form, and after getting that incredible story and following him as the hero, we finally get a live-action version. That's how much Ahsoka means to a lot of people. Rosario Dawson was the actress that they decided to go with to play Ahsoka, and I think she did a wonderful job. She captured so many of Ahsoka's mannerisms so well. And you have to remember, this is an older version of the character, so she's not going to entirely act as she did during the Clone Wars. It's going to be closer to how she did in Rebels. And when you compare the two, I think it is so similar, and I have to give major props to Rosario Dawson. But outside of just getting Ahsoka in live action, everything about this episode was fantastic. Outside of the final fight scene choreography, that was a little bit iffy, but it was beautiful, and it was written and directed by Dave Filoni, and I just couldn't have been more pleased with how Ahsoka was introduced in live action. The planet of Corvus was amazing. I would say by far the best planet we've gotten in The Mandalorian. It reminded me a lot of Dagobah. The action was epic, and I loved how in the beginning they portrayed Ahsoka as like this stealthy ninja that nobody could lay eyes on. She's just scattering all about, wiping out these troopers or whatever they were trying to take her out. The moments between her and Grogu and telling Din about Grogu, I mean, she revealed his name by connecting to him with the Force and was able to give us his backstory, telling us that he was at the Jedi Temple during the Clone Wars and was hidden during Order 66. So that was terrific. Of course, we had a couple things recanonized, the planet of Tython and HK droids. There was a name drop of Grand Admiral Thrawn, setting up this Ahsoka series that was revealed at the Disney Investors Day. So that's another epic Ahsoka moment of this year. And I have to mention, even though I wasn't super big on the final fight sequence between Ahsoka and the lady wielding the Beskar spear in that episode, it was very clearly an homage to Kill Bill. And I just thought the setting of that looked so amazing. And so I was just entranced by it, even though I didn't particularly enjoy the actual fight. So even in its faults, it's still somehow succeeding. But arguably the most interesting thing about this episode to me is the fact that it's almost a standalone episode. Like, it's setting up the Ahsoka series. It's one of the longer episodes. It doesn't have as much of a focus on Din. It brings in some other elements, like I mentioned, Grand Admiral Thrawn, and it recanonized a couple of things. Like, if there was any one episode of The Mandalorian you could just watch without knowing anything else about the entire series, it's easily this one. So I just find that very interesting that this could be like a standalone episode. So as much as I said that 2020 was a great year for Boba Fett, it was an even better year for Ahsoka, because now moving on to number 3, it's the Siege of Mandalore. The Siege of Mandalore is arguably the best Star Wars content we've gotten since Revenge of the Sith. The way they treated the 4-episode arc was almost like a movie. And people have cut it in with Revenge of the Sith as an extended version of that movie. Now, I personally haven't watched that just because going back and forth between animation and live action would be weird for me personally. Plus, the beginning of Revenge of the Sith is just so damn good. But you can absolutely see this 4-episode arc as a movie in itself. And if you did, honestly, I'd probably rank it 5th, only behind Revenge of the Sith and the original trilogy. It was a beautiful thing to see the Clone Wars brought back and properly finished, and this was essentially the end of the George Lucas era of Star Wars. The Siege of Mandalore was always the end game for this series, but of course they never got to finish it until they brought it back, and we finally got to see the conclusion, and we got to see what happened to Ahsoka and Captain Rex during Order 66, and it was just amazing. Bo-Katan and Darth Maul also played big roles in that arc as well, and the way that they produced this entire arc was just unlike anything we've seen from the Clone Wars in the past. The intro to every episode was almost like it was starting a movie, and it was a throwback to the old days of Lucasfilm. We got an awesome fight between Darth Maul and Ahsoka Tano, but it wasn't just an animated fight like every other fight we've seen in the show before. They actually got the actor who played Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace, Ray Park, to reenact this fight scene along with an actress who played Ahsoka Tano. So those movements were made by real people. And then, of course, there are countless moments where it intertwines with Revenge of the Sith, and we even get to hear Hayden Christensen's voice as well as Ian McDiarmid's in there. So this truly was a grand finale and something that was absolutely worth waiting for, even though I never thought we were going to get a true ending to the Clone Wars. And Ahsoka Tano, she was the main protagonist of the Siege of Mandalore. So 2020, when it comes to Star Wars, was the year of Ahsoka Tano. Number 2 on my list, at the Disney Investors Day, when Kathleen Kennedy came on the screen to talk about the Obi-Wan Kenobi spin-off limited series, she announced that Hayden Christensen will be returning in the role of Darth Vader. Now, of course, we all assume he's coming back to play Anakin Skywalker in flashbacks as well. I'm sure they're just saying Darth Vader for now to hide the fact that they're doing flashbacks to the general audience, but of course all of us who follow it much closer than that know he's going to be playing Anakin too. I mean, what point would there be to bringing him back if he was only playing Vader? But when I heard that announcement, I cannot tell you how overjoyed I was. I'm not somebody who shows a lot of outward emotion. Like when I get gifts for Christmas, I say thank you and try to be as genuine as I can. But like my stepbrothers, even to this day, when they get gifts, will scream like wild banshees, even if it's something as small as like a t-shirt or something. So being overtook by my emotions isn't something that's really in me. But when Hayden was announced, I did a fist pump in the air. I screamed. People in my house were wondering what's going on. And I honestly had tears in my eyes. It was that big of a deal to me. As big of a fan of the Clone Wars that I am, it's no secret that Matt Lanter's Anakin is far different from Hayden Christensen's. And being somebody who was born in 1999, I grew up with the prequels before the Clone Wars came out, and even the 2003 Clone Wars, I grew up with that as well. And so the iteration of Hayden Christensen's Anakin, or Matt Lucas's, who is much more similar to that than Matt Lanter's, is the one that I know and love, and the reason that I love Anakin. And even though I really think Matt Lanter did a great job, watching the Clone Wars to me just feels like I'm watching the Clone Wars without my favorite character, so it's really weird. So seeing Hayden return and likely getting Clone Wars flashbacks, which is something that I wanted my entire life, and getting to see him be Darth Vader as well, is honestly like a dream come true. It is the best piece of content that I could ever ask for, so I am just overwhelmed by the announcement. To my generation, Anakin is our Luke. He's the guy that we grew up with as the main protagonist and unfortunately, eventually the antagonist. But we are so excited for him to return. And I know there's a lot of people from the older generations that say, oh, he sucked in the prequels. I don't want to see him back. He's going to hamper my enjoyment of watching this series. Why couldn't they have gotten someone else? Well, you know what? This isn't for you. If you enjoyed the sequels, which I didn't, but if you enjoyed them, then that was what was for you. Luke, Han, and Leia. And don't get me wrong, I love the originals even more than I love the prequels, even though Revenge of the Sith is my favorite Star Wars movie. But those were for your era of fans, and hopefully we get more stuff with those characters because, again, I'm not a sequel fan, and hopefully they take Luke and Leia and Han and do some stuff with Thrawn, but that's besides the point. This Obi-Wan series is for people who like the prequels. That's why Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor are playing the main characters of the series. If you don't like it, well then too bad. You are not the only generation of fans, and for continuity's sake, it has to be Hayden. How weird would it be if they cast somebody other than him to play a live-action Anakin or Vader? That's just stupid. So, I don't want to hear it. And also, considering this isn't directed by George Lucas, and again, I'm a huge George Lucas fan, And even though I have criticisms of episodes 1 and 2, I love the prequels and I love the originals. George Lucas's Star Wars is Star Wars at its core, and what I love most about Star Wars. But of course, his directing had some issues and it wasn't super digestible for many, and many didn't like it. But Deborah Chow is directing this Obi-Wan Kenobi series, okay? And I'm sure that they will write Anakin/Vader a little bit differently, and I guarantee you that Hayden will put on a performance that blows everybody away, both as a rage-fueled, burnt-up, limbless Darth Vader out of his suit, as well as an Anakin in the Clone Wars, which honestly, that was the biggest problem with the prequels in my opinion. It's just that we didn't get more live-action Clone Wars stuff. We got the beginning of the Clone Wars and Attack of the Clones, and Anakin was still somewhat of a Padawan. He was learning, he was a little bit whiny. And then Revenge of the Sith, which is the tail end of the Clone Wars. The first act of Revenge of the Sith is some of my favorite Star Wars content that exists. The banter between Anakin and Obi-Wan and the action and all of that was great. So if we got more of that stuff in this series, but of course we get some better special effects. They're going to be using the technology that The Mandalorian does. And of course we've got Deborah Chow directing, and I just think she's fantastic. She did stuff on Better Call Saul and Mr. Robot, which are super highly critically acclaimed. I think Hayden's going to change a lot of people's minds. I think he's going to blow a lot of people's minds. And if you don't like him, well, too bad. Fans of his are overwhelmingly excited, and for me, this is one of the best things that I could ask for. The other day, I was actually watching this movie called Outcast with Hayden and Nicolas Cage, where they both play English knights, and there's this scene where Hayden is sitting by himself in this bar, and a group of soldiers walk up and are harassing these younger characters seeking help. And the way that it built up the tension, and seeing Hayden, who was just so cool and he was really good in that movie, and seeing him eventually step in and take out all of these soldiers. And it was a decent group of them, and Hayden's playing sort of like this drunken character, and he had his hat down before he eventually got up. It was just really well done, and I was just thinking about Anakin the entire time, and like how many cool flashbacks are we gonna get with Anakin in this Obi-Wan show. I was getting giddy like a schoolgirl about an average movie where Hayden Christensen is playing a drunken medieval knight. Like, how am I gonna feel when I see him as Anakin again? Like, man, I can't wait. And number 1 on my list, could it really be anything else? It is the return of Luke Skywalker in The Mandalorian Season 2 finale. I'm sure when I actually see Hayden return as Anakin in the Obi-Wan series when it comes out, that'll top Luke's return for me, but the actual return of Luke this year tops just the announcement that Hayden is coming back. When I was a little kid, I used to love watching WWE, and one of my favorite things about WWE is when its wrestlers would make surprise comebacks. They'd be out for months with an injury or something like that, and there'd be a match, maybe their friend is in it, and he's getting beat up, and we don't know how he's gonna make it out of there, and then all of a sudden, after being gone forever, this WWE superstar returns. His theme song hits, and he comes out either sprinting super hard or he stays on the ramp looking all intimidating. It was just an incredible thing, and I loved it. And seeing Luke come back in The Mandalorian gave me that same feeling. It's the closest thing in Star Wars that I felt to the portal scene in Endgame. Growing up with Star Wars, even though they're my favorite movies ever, specifically Revenge of the Sith and the original trilogy, I knew the stories. I knew that Anakin became Darth Vader. The original trilogy was around for years and years before I was born, and I was born the year The Phantom Menace came out, so I sort of grew up with this story already existing. So nothing surprised me. And while there are many great moments in The Clone Wars and Rebels, nothing quite measures up to this. And as I've mentioned before, I'm not a sequel fan. I liked The Force Awakens, it was very fun, but The Last Jedi was incredibly disappointing to me, and by The Rise of Skywalker, I just didn't care, and I thought that was very poorly made as a film. So I just didn't have an emotional connection to any of those films, other than anger a little bit, specifically towards Luke in The Last Jedi. So to have this moment, in this piece of content that's not about Skywalkers at all, it's The Mandalorian, it's about a bounty hunter and this little baby Yoda, and to have been really frustrated and disappointed with Luke's portrayal in The Last Jedi, to see him sort of redeemed in this way, to see the character that I always knew and loved make an epic return when I wasn't expecting it, and it was just so beautifully done, from the music to the choreography and everything. I was overwhelmed. To me, this is by far the best moment for Star Wars in 2020, and for something to top the announcement that Hayden Christensen is coming back as Anakin is mind-blowing for me. Like, I never would have thought in a million years that anything would even top that. So 2020, what a year for Star Wars. As a whole, it was an incredibly rough year for a lot of people, but Star Wars has done an amazing job at helping people get through these tough times, and I'm glad that us as Star Wars fans can really start to come together and enjoy this content that's being put out. If you enjoyed the content that's been put out over the past few years, then I'm totally happy for you, and I'm honestly envious because I don't like disliking my favorite thing in the world, but it just wasn't for me, and it wasn't for a lot of people. But I'm really glad that we're at the point where everyone, almost universally, is enjoying the stuff that's being put out in The Mandalorian, and everybody's really excited about some of the future stuff that's coming out, and that's a beautiful thing. Prequel fans, sequel fans, original fans, all coming together. So let me know down in the comments below what your favorite Star Wars moments of 2020 were, and what you're looking forward to in the future. This was a really tough year for all of us, and I know we're all looking forward to 2021 and beyond. And I'm not surprised that Star Wars, of all things, is what kept a lot of people going. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I will catch you next time.